I have a question, Ian. You mentioned talking to the three different audiences. Are you doing all of that in the same show? So you're making sure you're speaking to everyone in turn?
Well, yeah, so you're only going to have three audiences if you repurpose your show into a podcast, and
Hmm.
that is more tricky. But if you're going live just regular live, then you do need to think about both your replay audience and your live audience. I think that's a big mistake. What I see quite a lot of the time are people going live and they're not addressing anyone at all. They're just it's like a monologue. And
Right, right.
when I've gone on those shows, I've commented, and then there's just like no mention of what I've done. I think, well, what was the point in that? Why did I turn up? So you want to think you want to think about your live viewers. You want to think
Hmm.
you do want to mention them. That's so important.
Hmm.
But for your replay audience, if you spend too long with your live audience and comments, it can become a little bit boring. And so you need to
Yeah.
think about those. You need to do a bit of juggling, mental juggling, when you do your shows. And so the way I do this is I have a little live segment at the beginning which I trim off. So on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, you can actually trim off
Mm.
the beginning of your show for the replay. So I do that. We
Mhm.
have a bit of a live segment, it's a bit more informal. But then for the rest of the show, I segment it. So I've got three sections. I'll talk about, with my guest, or if I'm on my own, I will talk about what we want to talk about, and then I'll look at the comments, and I'll answer questions or put them on the screen, and then I'll go to the second section and then go back. So it's got a structure. You're not getting distracted all the time by the comments. You're using them in a way that makes sense for the replay as well. So I think that's really important, and it's the same for the podcast.
Oh,
It becomes very
yeah.
boring for the podcast listeners if you're talking about the comments all the time. The only difference with the podcast side of things is that you need to sometimes explain what's happening on the screen. I think today this would make a very good podcast because there's not too many visual elements to what we're talking about. But on my show
Mhm.
today, I had a guest and we were talking about branding, graphics and branding. And so quite a lot of the time I had to explain. So on the screen at the moment, we've got a logo on the top
Right.
right hand corner for my podcast listeners so they
Right,
understood what
right.
was happening.